Hi, I'm Nancy Harrington, and it is February 25th, 2012. I'm conducting an interview with Mr. Chuck Lorre on behalf of the Archive of American Television in the Pacific Palisades, California. So we're going to take about 10 minutes and just get a little background information.
All right.
Easy stuff.
Background.
What was your name at birth?
Charles Michael Levine.
And when did it become Chuck Lorre?
Immediately after I was born, my mother decided she didn't like my name, so she started the whole idea of rewriting right out of the gate. She changed her mind and started calling me Chuck. That's what stuck.
And how about the last name?
What about it?
When did it change?
Oh, when did Levine become Lorre?
Yeah.
I was probably about 27, 28 years old, and I decided the name caused me some emotional distress, and my wife at the time said, "Why don't you change it?" And I thought that was a remarkable idea. It never occurred to me. So, $200 and a judge, and it became Lorre. It was actually my wife who came up with the word Lorre. I said, "That sounds nice. Sure, that sounds fine." She said, "And spell it fancy." So that's how it's spelled. It was an entirely youthful, foolish thing to do.
And where and when were you born?
I was born in the Manhattan Women's Hospital in 1952.
What date?
October 18th.
Mm-hmm. And what city and state was that?
New York, New York.
And where did you grow up?
My folks moved out to Long Island when I was about 5, 6 years old. So that was pretty much, I'm a Long Island kid.
And what was your father's name and what did he do?
My father's name was Robert, and he had a luncheonette, which is perhaps an archaic word now, but it was a candy store with a small eating area where you can get hamburgers and scrambled eggs and tuna fish sandwiches and Coca-Cola, coffee and milkshakes, ice cream right out of the tub, and newspapers, cigars, cigarettes, things like that. It serviced the Long Island Railroad, and Grumman Aircraft was nearby in Bethpage, Long Island. Uncle Bob's Luncheonette was the name of it.
Did you ever work there with him?
All the time. I was put to work when I was about 12, 13 years old, whether I liked it or not. So. And
what was your mother's name and what did she do?
My mother's name was Miriam, and she was known as Mim. That was her nickname, and she was, as was appropriate at the time, the housewife, mom, and but then she went back to work probably around when I was about 8, 9 years old. She went back to work. She went to work at a clothing store, which, if you want to get Freudian, was called Lorre's. So.
What traits did you inherit from your parents?
Well, my father definitely taught me how to work. He taught me the discipline of work. You show up whether you like it or not. You show up whether you're sick or not. You just show up. And complaining wasn't an option. Although complaining is sort of built into the genetic line, going back several thousand years. But I think probably for the purposes of this, what I got from both parents was a sense of humor. I think there was a lot of laughing. There was a lot of tears and yelling and screaming, but there was a lot of laughing. And my father loved stand-up comedians. He just loved to watch, Rickles and Buddy Hackett, on and on and on, Bob Hope, and I kind of watched that with him growing up on the Ed Sullivan Show, and I became enamored with that as well.
Did you watch a lot of TV as a kid?
Well, when we got a TV, there wasn't a lot to watch early on, but Sullivan was a big window into the world of comedy and music. And then you had Gleason and Lucy and Phil Silvers and some real archetypal comedy that, it was powerful. It was, remarkable stuff. That's the earliest stuff that I remember. It was The Honeymooners, I Love Lucy, the Phil Silvers Show. And then later on you had Get Smart, Tommy and the Smothers Brothers.
Did you have siblings?
I have an older sister, Joan, who lives in Massachusetts.
Where in Massachusetts?
She's in Williamstown.
Do you feel like your upbringing is reflected in any of the characters or stories that you've created through the years?
Well, let's see. That's an interesting question. My upbringing. Can we narrow that question down a little bit? Because I'm not quite sure how to answer that.
Do you think any of like the characters you've written are there parts of them in your family, or any of the stories that come from your life, or?
Oh well, sure. I mean, there's the element of the toxic mother is very much alive and well in certainly in 2.5 Men, and you know, a woman who could look at a beautiful day and say, "Isn't it a shame that all days can't be beautiful days?" And see that can find the negative in anything, and there's there's humor in that, because it's it's a worldview that it's so troubling, but you learn to deal with it. You adapt to it. So,
what were your interests growing up?
I guess the first interest would have been baseball. I mean, all we did as kids was play all day long. When we weren't in school, we were playing baseball in the street. With those pink rubber balls that, I don't know, they're pinkies. And we played all day. We just endlessly amounts of, playing ball. And then when I was about 12 years old, maybe even younger, maybe more like around 10 or 11, I had an uncle, my Uncle Jack, who was a professional violinist, who came over one day, pretty ripped. He was pretty loaded. And he had a little acoustic guitar that he gave me. And that began the process of getting involved in music.
Did you write at all?
As a little boy?
As a kid? Do any writing, journals or anything?
No. I was working on my penmanship, big C, big D, little d. Well, actually, in 4th grade, I remember becoming a little bit enamored with poetry, but I think that's because the 4th grade teacher was hot, and I wanted to impress her. I had a crush on my 4th grade teacher, and she was into poetry, so I was into poetry, which actually might be the theme for the whole life, which was, sure, I'll write if girls will like me. Yeah, sure, why not? Whatever it takes.
What did you want to be when you grew up?
I don't know. I'm going to get in trouble here, right? What did I want to be when I grew up? Let's see. You wanted to play for the Yankees initially. Every little boy in New York wanted to play for the Yankees, and short of that, the Mets would do. But then, when I got my hands on the guitar, and especially when the Beatles arrived in '63, I guess, that changed everything. Then music became really, really vibrant and exciting, and it never stopped being exciting for years and years. All through the '60s and '70s, music was just a never-ending stream of exciting stuff happening. From the Beatles and the Stones and Hendrix and Joplin and then California with Crosby, Stills and Nash and Buffalo Springfield and Jefferson Airplane. It kept going, everything coming out of England, Led Zeppelin. It was unbelievable. Steely Dan in the '70s, Stevie Wonder. It was unbelievable time.
Yeah.
Bruce Springsteen. We got to say Bruce Springsteen.
Where did you go to college?
I went to State University of New York at Potsdam in northern New York for 2 years.
And what did you study?
Marijuana and rock and roll. Mostly the Allman Brothers. It was just a time to, it was a 2 years. It was a skip 2 years. It was a sojourn to the fear of being sent to Vietnam at the time, and I knew in my bones that I didn't have what it takes to be a soldier. So the only option was to stay in school, and it was, I was a guitar player in my mind. I didn't see an M16 in my hands. No.
And so you started your time as a musician. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, back then it was mostly playing bars. Drinking age was 18 then. So you could make a living playing in local bars and frat houses. God bless the fraternities; they were always throwing parties, and the bands at the time there was a lot of freedom to what you could play. The people were so, well, let's say, messed up that you could play Whipping Post, which was I think in 7/4, which was not something you could dance to, but everybody'd be happy to hear it. Album music was very much acceptable in a live performance thing. You didn't have to necessarily play, a rigid top 40, run of songs. You could do strange things. You could play "And Your Bird Can Sing" by the Beatles, which is not going to get, it's a great song, but it's not necessarily, the crowd pleaser for dancing. But it was a really wonderful time to play literally anything you wanted, and people were really just too stoned to care. So.
And you started writing songs at this point?
Yeah, early 70s I started writing. Yeah.
Can you tell us, was there a lot of storytelling in your songs? What kind of songs did you write?
Mediocre songs were the most part what I wrote, and I think I can proudly say I wrote several hundred mediocre songs over the next 15 years, till I started transitioning into television in the mid-'80s. I was deeply influenced by Randy Newman, so if there was any sophistication to this songwriting at all, it was a result. That's my dog walking on the floor. If there was any sophistication to the songwriting at all, it was because I was just emulating Randy Newman. I was trying to find a way to write lyrics and music that captured what he was doing, which I thought was phenomenal. It was funny, which appealed to me. And he took viewpoints that I had never heard before. He would take a sort of a non-traditional or even an objectionable viewpoint, and make it the central point of the song. He would sing as a racist, for instance, and if you either went along with the irony of it or you thought the song was offensive, but it was remarkable. I hadn't, pop music didn't have a lot of comedy. The Beatles occasionally would veer into humorous areas, but for the most part, it took itself pretty seriously, and so that was my first introduction to music that could be, just inform, but cause you to perhaps laugh. I remember there was a band out of San Francisco, way back, called the Tubes, and they were putting on these circus-like shows. And they were doing music that was also pretty bent, and I loved it. I just loved it. I went, oh, this is what I want to do. This is, I remember playing songs I had written for a friend of mine back in the 70s. He said, "Oh man, you're a comedy writer," and I went, "No, I'm a musician and a songwriter." And I was actually offended when he said, "You're a comedy writer." No, I'm not a comedy writer. I'm a songwriter. So it took me a while to accept the fact that I'd hit the wall as far as music is concerned. It was just so far I was going to go.
You did have one hit though, so tell us about that.
Really, we're going to call it a hit? You mean the Debbie Harry thing? French Kissin' in the USA. Debbie Harry covered that song on her first solo album. It might have helped end her solo career, actually. it crawled into the charts. It did well overseas too. Actually, it was pretty exciting for a moment. It did very well in England, but it was an exciting moment, to finally have written after 300-400 songs, of severe mediocrity, to have one that was less mediocre, be on the radio, and but we can't sit here and call it a hit song. I think if you go get her greatest hits package, you won't find French Kissing on it. It might be in the hole. Well, no, actually, there's no more vinyl. What am I talking about? It's not. It won't be there. The bigger hit was my buddy Dennis Brown and I co-wrote the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles music, which has actually proven to have more legs and more shelf life than anything I've ever done. So.
You wrote quite a few songs for animated shows, theme songs. How did that come about?
I was, eager to have both careers, and so whenever there was an opportunity to write music as opposed to just script writing, I jumped at it. I lobbied for it. I annoyed the producers. I begged. I pleaded. I wanted to do the theme song for the Turtles the minute I heard about it, but the original Turtles were given the job, if I recall correctly. And but at the end of the day, I from what I was told, they just didn't. They just shrugged it off. They didn't do anything. So we got a call at the 11th hour from the producer and said, can you come up with a theme song, and you have 48 hours, go. So
how do you do that? What's the process?
you hurry. You sit down and you start writing songs. And hi, that's my dog. We read all the comic books. It was an underground comic at the time. It was a black and white garage-made comic. It was pretty primitive stuff, but it was remarkable in a way, in that it was so outlandish, and so it was in your face outlandish. It was. We're going to just take all these elements, combine them, and here, buy it, don't buy it, up to you. And there might have been some animation to look at, and there were key points that you could grab onto. There was obviously the characters, but they had built-in character traits that, and we just we drew on all of them to try and find something that, in 30 seconds or something, captured the spirit of the show. And we got away with it. We wrote and recorded a demo. It was fun. I had like $2,000 to do the whole thing, and we got a recording studio in Los Angeles that was at the time being used by Journey to record an album, and we got the studio from midnight to 8 a.m., which is the cheapest hours you can buy. It's just, and all their equipment was, spread out. All this great big touring stadium equipment was all over the studio, and we're in there recording the Turtles theme song at 5 o'clock in the morning, and it worked.
That's great. So how did you transition from being a musician to your television career? What was your first job, and how'd that come about?
Well, actually, the first thing I got was I'd convinced a guy who produced TV documentaries about motorcycle racing that I could write the narration for the documentaries. There was a time when on Saturday afternoon you could watch these half-hour documentaries about racing at Laguna Seca, or trial riding in England, or Supercross. And motocross, and I had never ridden a motorcycle, but I convinced him that I could write the narrative and interview the riders, and I actually over time he taught me how to edit film on a moviola, with a razor blade and tape, and I was actually editing the documentary film to so that it would work with the narration, and that was my first time someone paid me to write, and for television.
How did the relationship with DIC Entertainment come up in your animation part of your career?
Well, that's a humbling story. I had a 2-year-old son, and a baby coming. And I was a musician and seriously struggling to make ends meet. I think the word is poor. And I was playing nightclubs and private parties, bar mitzvahs, weddings, whenever I could. And during the day, I went door to door doing what's called cold call sales, where you just walk into an office and try and sell little gifts for the holidays, all sorts of things, whatever you could, little radios or something that you could, go down to Long Beach and buy for $8 a piece and then sell them for 15 or 2 for 20, whatever you could get, and try and make some extra money during the day. When you walk into any office building in Los Angeles, you'll usually see a sign saying no soliciting. Those signs were put up to keep me out. And I always took great pride in seeing that sign and going, and walk in. And if the security guys caught you and chased you out, all right, well, no harm, no foul. I mean, you weren't going to jail, but you had a chance to maybe, sell something and make some money and keep your family afloat. Believe it or not, this is getting to DIC, but there was a day when I was walking down Ventura Boulevard, and somewhere in 1983, I don't know, 84, something like that. Well, my daughter she hadn't been born yet, so it would have been 82 or 83. And I remember going into a hair salon. I even remember the name. It was Barron's Hair Salon on Ventura Boulevard near Laurel Canyon. And trying to sell these little radios. It was during the holidays, or before the holidays. And then I walked back out onto the street, and there was a flight of stairs up to, I didn't know what, maybe offices above the hair salon. And I was exhausted and depressed, and I pretty much thought I'd ruined my life, and I made every bad choice imaginable. But I walked up those steps, and it was a fledgling animation company, DIC, up there, and there was a dozen people working there, I don't know, in this little tiny dinky office. And I said, "What do you guys do up here?" And they said, "We do animation for children." And I had the moxie to say, "Do you do funny stuff? Because I can help you with the funny stuff." I mean, I'm sitting there selling door to door, and they went, "Well, yeah, we do. We're doing a cartoon. We're starting a cartoon called Heathcliff." And I said, "Well, I'm your man." And but first, I sold some radios. And they said, "Come back after the holidays." And I had some material that I'd written, some spec material that I'd written, nothing for animation. I knew nothing about animation. Like motorcycle racing, I was faking it right out of the gate. I was just, I'll learn, I'll figure it out. And after the holidays, I came back and I pitched them stories. They liked the spec material that I'd written enough to let me pitch some ideas. So I came back after the New Year's, and the first one I sold was called An Officer and an Alley Cat, where Heathcliff is sent to military school to learn discipline. And they gave me $500 for the script, and I thought I'd died and gone to heaven. I couldn't believe it. They paid me. And I actually went out and got a book. Maybe was it Sid Fields? I'm trying to remember the name of the book. It was How to Write a Script. I didn't even know what a script looked like. I had to go get, and I went, there was stores on Hollywood Boulevard back then where you could buy old scripts. For 50 cents you could buy a Get Smart or something like that. So you can just see what the margins look like. Is it double spaced? Is it single spaced? And I got a typewriter for $29, $39, and I wrote a script, and they paid me. So I wrote another one, and then I went, "Oh, okay, this is very interesting. This might be the answer to the poor problem." And I started writing like 2 a week. So suddenly I was, struggling guitar player making $300-400 a week to making $1,000 a week writing, Heathcliff the Cat cartoons. And at a certain point, DIC decided it would be cheaper to hire me on staff than to pay me as a freelancer. So they cut my fee for writing scripts by about $150, but gave me a couple $100 a week to be on staff. So I thought, okay, I'm coming out ahead. And then suddenly I'm now an editor. I mean, I've been writing scripts freelance for, I don't know, 3-4 months, and they decided to make me now I'm a story editor. Now I'm editing other people's work. I have no idea what I'm doing. And so there was always a low level of anxiety because I'm completely, faking it and trying to pretend that I know what I'm doing. And I probably over the next few years wrote 40, 50 scripts, both dramatic and action cartoons and the comedic, silly kind. And it was a good learning ground because I was learning on the job.
What did you learn doing animated stuff that you took to doing sitcoms later in your career?
Nobody knows anything. The William Goldman rule applies in television. Everybody's guessing to some extent as to what constitutes quality and what constitutes, shall we say, crap. But I had small children, so I really did want to entertain children. I wanted what I did to turn into something that was valuable. I wanted it to work. I was invested in the end result, which is I wanted at least my children to watch it and go, hey, that's funny. I wanted them to get up at 7 o'clock in the morning on Saturday with me and watch these damn things and be entertained. I had a personal relationship with the material because my children were very young. And I also had a vested interest in writing them as quickly as I could too, because I had no insurance and I had to pay cash for my daughter, who was a C-section at a hospital. It was when the hospital administrator said, "How do you plan on paying for this?" And I said, "Cash." I remember the look on her face, the horror on her face. I said, "It'll take a while. I'll pay it over time, but I'll pay it off." It took about 5 years to get the pink slip on my son. It was very expensive.
During this time, you also worked for Henson on a few projects, right?
Yeah, I got to
Fraggle Rock and Muppet Babies.
Muppet Babies, yeah.
Tell us about those experiences.
Well, they did an animated version of Muppet Babies at Marvel. And they flew us, a couple of writers, out to New York to the Muppet Brownstone. And we got to sit in a room, a big, long, beautiful, conference room with, at the end of the table was a gorgeous oil painting of Kermit as the Blue Boy. And it was a magical place. And Jim walked in and kind of plunked down and started talking, hey, it's pretty funny, You realize, oh my God, Kermit's in the room. It was a breathtaking experience. I was writing, was it Pigs in Space? It was one of the things they had done with the live puppeteering and Muppeteering, and we did animated versions of that. And we took severe beatings critically from the people that were running Marvel. And then Jim walked in and went, well, they're pretty stupid, and you wrote them pretty stupid, so I guess that's pretty good. And, and I just realized that, for a guy who had mastered his craft, simplicity, he had no ego in the game. He was, he wasn't trying to impose his ego on the work. It was just the work. Is it funny? It's funny. Okay, let's move on. And it was very refreshing to see, a master storyteller and comedy writer and obviously puppeteer bring such a simple, fresh, he brought nothing but, oh, well, what are we trying to achieve here? Have we achieved it? Great. I'm going to lunch. He was an old hippie with his hand up a sock, and it was glorious. It was a great moment. I'll never forget that. It was probably all of a half hour in a room with Jim, like we're on a first name basis, but it was a great experience. I wish I wasn't so hungover during the whole thing, but it was a great experience.
Are there any other shows in that period that stand out to you that you worked on? Any animated shows?
I very quickly came to resent the whole process. It was a factory for the most part, and it was driven by toy companies. I shouldn't name them, but Hasbro and Mattel come to mind. And then the publishers got involved who had properties, and they were all trying to sell toys. And it felt like I'd stumbled into a really kind of venal, exploitive, environment, and far from, far from Abbey Road, and I wanted to get out. I wanted to get out. I didn't like. We literally were working for a toy company, essentially. When I was at Marvel, Hasbro owned many of the properties that were being developed there, and it was really their input. And it's okay. That's fine. You're allowed to sell toys and stuff. I don't have to participate in trying to convince children to buy toys. You were literally writing scripts and told, oh, you have to put in this truck or this robot or this, or Sparkle Pony or whatever the My Little Pony things were called, in order to sell the product. So essentially, you're writing commercials. Ultimately, they were 30-minute commercials. It was offensive. Suddenly I'm an artiste. A year ago, I was a guy walking door to door, and playing bar mitzvahs at the Sportsman's Lodge in Sherman Oaks, it's at Studio City. And a year later, I'm an artiste being offended by a toy company. So
how'd you get out?
Say what you will. I needed to get out.
How did you get out? How'd you make the transition?
I decided that that there would be more integrity and more satisfaction writing for human beings without toy companies. And so I started writing spec scripts at night. After everybody went home, I'd sit there in my office at Marvel. I went from DIC to Marvel Animation at one point, and I wrote a spec script for The Golden Girls, which I loved. I just loved the show. I thought that it was brilliant. And I wrote a spec script for Miami Vice, which was in its first season. And I thought, and that was terrific. And Michael Mann, it changed the whole look of television, the colors and the film quality, the music. It was pretty exciting, the initial idea of it. And they had even tried to bring back Twilight Zone in the 80s. And I wrote a Twilight Zone story, a script that, so I was prepared to enter any door that would open. Another reason why having small children was a big part of my story, because I was going to, take care of them, and hopefully, if I got into prime time, join the Writers Guild and get health insurance. Health insurance was, when you have two little ones, how cool would it be if someone else paid the dentistry and you didn't go broke when somebody needed a dentist visit? It didn't capsize your entire life. So I wanted to get it. There was no real union to speak of in animation. It was the Wild West. You got paid a fee for what you did, and the company owned everything. And all attempts to unionize that area have failed, really, for the last 25, 30 years. They've never really been able to succeed. A few things like The Simpsons and some primetime stuff has managed to crawl into some kind of environment where the writers can get protected. But I was motivated to both, creatively and financially to find warm bodies to write for. And I had, again, the naivete to think that I could do it, although I had really no reason to believe that. But, you can't overestimate, youthful arrogance and stupidity. It is helpful at times to not know any better.
So now, did something happen with that Golden Girls script? Did it get to Betty White somehow?
Oh, okay, you know about that. Yeah, I had a fellow who was a very successful animation writer, friend of mine, named Jeffrey Scott. And Jeffrey lived next door. How successful was Jeffrey? He lived next door to Betty White, okay? You know, I was living in a little condo in Glendale. I'm sorry, condo. Let's call it what it was. It was a rented house. And he said, if I like the script, I'll give it to Betty. So I wrote a script that featured her character. I'm not an idiot, right? So I wrote a script that was pretty much came out of something I experienced when my dad passed away, which was that my mother was very angry with him for passing away because she was frightened about being alone. And I was really struck by the anger as a response to losing your mate. Almost, to the point where it overwhelmed the grief. And I wrote a script that featured Betty's character where she was struggling with feelings of anger towards her deceased husband because she felt he abandoned her. And so it was really a personal script for me. And I gave it to Jeffrey, and he approved of it. And he gave it to Betty. And I got a handwritten note, I don't know when, within a week or so, from Betty White. I wish I could find it, saying that she loved the script and she was bringing it to the producers of the show. And I remember thinking, well, that's it. My career has begun. I've hit the big time. Alert the media. I've arrived. I had no idea what it would have meant to the producers to have an actor on your show walk in and put a script on your desk from somebody who knows who and say, I want to do this. I think this is good. The look on their faces, the horror that they must have felt. I know if I was in their position, now having been in that position, now I understand it. At the time, I just thought, well, Betty will go in, she'll give the script to the producers, and they'll be thrilled because they'll see how wonderful it is. Anyway, it came back to me at some point from the producers of the show with a form letter saying it was not up to their standards. Thank you for your submission and good luck. So essentially it came back with a toe tag, And I was heartbroken. But it did open up other doors, not Golden Girls though. And actually the Miami Vice script got me into Miami Vice. It got me a meeting at Miami Vice where they sat down and said, we like your script very much. Unfortunately, it's funny. And we're troubled by that. I went, well, do a funny episode. Hello? Well, humor is acceptable. And they went, no, we're not going to do a funny episode. I said, all right, I'll take the funny out. I mean, I just want to work. I could probably get it to be not funny. I don't think it's going to be tough. So yeah, if that door had opened, I probably would have had a very mediocre career as a drama writer, as an action, cop, shoot 'em up writer. But it didn't. That door did not open.
So what was the first script that did get picked up?
I got to write, as a freelance writer, I got a couple of assignments to write for a show called Charles in Charge with Scott Baio. And I remember going to the taping of the show, and I did not recognize one line of dialogue from the show they shot, from the script I gave them. Yet I was very proud. I was sitting there, yay, this is my script. Nothing. I don't think there was a vowel. There were no consonants, nothing. It was an entirely different script, and they were happy with it. And I got to write another one, and then the guy who created that show, Michael Jacobs, told me that he was writing he was going to produce a pilot, and I could come work on the pilot. And And the pilot at the time was called Who's Dad? With a question mark. And I was still working at Marvel writing cartoons, and I went to my boss, Margaret Lesh, and I said, listen, I get a week off every year. Can I take my week off on this week? And she said, yeah, sure. She was glad to get rid of me, actually. I was kind of a nuisance. And I took that week off and went to work on that pilot, and that became My Two Dads with Paul Reiser. And that was an amazing experience, too, because, I'm sitting there, now I'm on the ground floor with watching this thing take shape over the course of a week. Brandon Tartikoff is there all the time. He's, a legend, and he's just hanging around, and he'd like to sit with the writers and pitch jokes. So again, more arrogance and balls than brains. I'm pitching in front of him because I figure if he likes me, I'm gold, right? I can get Brandon's attention, And I remember the first time I pitched out loud in front of him, Michael looked over at me like, are you out of your mind? You don't speak. And I remember Brandon went, that's funny, write that down. I'm like, yeah, it's funny, write that down, And I was really out of line. I had no sense of my place. I just, I said, I can do this, come on. How tough can this be? I'm not competing with Jimi Hendrix and John Lennon anymore. Come on, this is, the bar has gotten so much lower when you left music. There's no, you get the difference. So
Did your interaction with Brandon Tartikoff, did it impact you as a writer at all?
Well, actually, a year or so later, I got a chance to go in and pitch him an idea for a pilot with Donna Summer, because someone had attached me to go meet with Donna Summer because I had a musical background, and I got to go into his office and with Donna and pitch this idea about Chanteuse, a diva, and her home life, and it didn't go anywhere, but. It's those memorable memories. Is that redundant? Memorable memories? I think it is. He was a forceful guy, really forceful guy, and pretty tough on the people around him. Really tough. I remember thinking if I was Warren Littlefield sitting in that meeting, and he said the things he said to Warren, if he said them to me, it would have been a knife fight. It would have been on. He was tough. The people around him, it was boot camp around him, but he was very nice to me. I don't think I really was high enough up the ladder to pay much attention to. But he was a gut player, looking back. He just reacted. He just responded. He wasn't, I never saw focus groups and detailed analysis about audiences. I think he was one of those kind of guys that just responded to material and then trusted the response, which I think is a better way to go. You just, trust your human response and assume that assuming you're human, other humans might agree. So
back to My Two Dads. What was the premise of the show?
The premise of the show was that these two men had had a one-night stand with the same woman 12 years prior to the show starting. I assume within a few days of each other. I remember some of the other writers suggesting that the show should be called Slut or Bastard, but okay, so that was the premise. It goes beyond that. They are called into, at the beginning of the show, they're called into a judge's office, Florence Stanley, brilliant Florence Stanley, who informs them that the woman has passed away. And she's decided that one of them is the father. She doesn't know which one, but it'd be best if they both raised the little girl. And no one really wants to do a DNA test. And these two strange men decide to live together to raise a girl that they've never met. So, and I remember my agent at the time, when I was sent the script for the pilot, said, "What do you think?" And maybe it doesn't speak well of me to tell you my response, but my response was, "Who cares what I think? This is going to be on NBC. It's got real people in it. It's not a cartoon. I'm in. I mean, if they'll have me, I'm in. Who cares? I'd been writing for Talking Ponies. This is incrementally better, So, for me, it was aesthetically a step up. And, looking back, I learned a lot. And I got to work with Paul Reiser, a brilliant comedian. Greg Evigan, wonderful actor. And Florence. I mean, Florence was a terrific, terrific comic actress. So, the premise notwithstanding, it was a great education in turning out a show every day. It was hard. We worked till 3, 4 o'clock in the morning every day to get to My Two Dads. And not to denigrate it, but it was, I think Michael was learning as he went too. Everybody was learning on the job. There was no off-site training. The second script had an outline again that was handed to me to write, and I went home to write it, and I remember reaching a point where it didn't make sense to me, and it didn't feel right to write it as outlined. And boy, I wish my memory was better, but there was a consultant on the show, a real great old timer on the show who I called at home, and I said, "This doesn't feel right to me. What do I do?" And he said, "Just write it the way you feel it." I said, "But it's not the outline. I don't want to get in trouble." And he goes, "Well, I think you're right. I mean, I think trust your instincts. Do it the way it feels right." And I wrote the script and handed it in, very nervous that I had not followed the rules, what I thought were the rules. And Michael called me at home one night and said, "We love your script. We're going to put it in production next week, right away. We're bouncing the script that was supposed to go next week, and we're putting your script in its place." And I went, "Really?" I mean, this was like, over the weekend. It was going to go on Monday or something like that. It was like, and we weren't even going to get to rewrite it before it went to the table reading. And he said, "Why didn't you follow the outline?" And I went, "It just didn't feel right." And he went, "Oh, okay." And it was an epiphany. I went, oh, what happens if you follow your heart? What happens if you trust your instincts? Which, goes back to what I saw Tartikoff do. What happens if you just trusted yourself to do things that felt appropriate as opposed to just going by the numbers? And that script really began my career because it got shot. It introduced a little boy named Giovanni Ribisi into the series, who has since become quite a remarkable adult actor. He's a great actor, and it saved my job. I would have been fired, I think, had that script not worked out. So it was a real turning point for me.
So when and why did you leave?
It got canceled. I rode that horse till it died. They did 60 some odd episodes, and then at some point somebody at NBC went, "This doesn't make any sense, I guess," and they pulled the plug on it, and I was very fortunate because at that same year everyone had quit or been fired from Roseanne. So there was a huge vacuum there, and I saw that as an opportunity to go onto what was then the #1 show in television, and quality family comedy.
And what was your role when you first started with Roseanne, and how did that evolve?
Well, my role was as a second lieutenant to the boss, who was Bob Meyer, who was who had prior to that had been running My Two Dads. In its third and final season, he was the boss on My Two Dads, and we had developed a great working relationship, and he was very patient with me. very patient with me. I was a very high maintenance writer, and which is the nicest way to describe a pain in the ass. And it was really interesting. There was this great opportunity to go onto a great big hit show, quality show. It was really good, and Danny Jacobson and Matt Williams had created a beautiful family comedy, and they weren't going to hire any writers till they hired an executive producer. So I got my agent at the time to lobby hard for them to hire Bob, because I was convinced Bob's first hire would be me. So I was doing a little agenting, trying to get the executive. They had a non-writing executive producer, Jay Daniels, who was trying to create a brand new writing staff from scratch. And I met with him, and I actually gave him the Golden Girls script to read, because nobody wanted to read My Two Dads at the time. It was not in favor. It was just not the kind of show people would read, and you couldn't get an honest read from somebody with one of those scripts. And maybe unfairly, but that was the case. So I gave him the Golden Girls. And he liked it, but he said, I can't hire you until we hire an executive producer who will then make his own calls. So I'm saying, you got to hire Bob Meyer. Really, Bob Meyer's your guy. You want Bob Meyer. And Bob Meyer was the right call, because, he had a real high bar for quality, and he was a perfectionist, but he also had the temperament to work with Roseanne. And it's a very volatile environment. When we started working, we were there for a few weeks, and she sang the national anthem in San Diego. So there were helicopters flying overhead a few weeks after we started. The President of the United States was attacking the star of the show. I mean, it was crazy from day one.
Were there rules for writing a Roseanne script?
You were told the rules as you went along, Again, my first script almost got me fired. She hated it. She just hated it. And I have no real memory as to what the script was particularly, but she had a pretty good instinct for glibness, She wanted to write an honest comedy, about what real families say and do, how they treat each other. And the glibness got burned out of you really quickly, or you were gone. And it was quite an education. And again, it was 70-hour weeks. We worked 17-hour days, 6 days a week for a couple of years. It was crazy. It was crazy. You go home and the sun's coming up. It was nuts. This, on the other hand, was, and then it was, and the show kind of tanked for about 8-9 months after the anthem, and then it started to come back up, and then after it came back up, it would routinely get 40 million viewers. I mean, that's it's unheard of today. But there was only 4 networks at the time. Fox was still a baby network. So it was pretty exciting to be on a show that had that kind of reach. It was miserable, but it was a great place to learn how to get real. It informed Grace Under Fire, dramatically, because, okay, I'm going to write about a single mom and a woman who's been through a terrible divorce and spousal abuse and raising children without a safety net. It was so much informed by what I learned on Roseanne to try and keep things real, to have the comedy come from real events as opposed to contrived events. There were no female wrestlers on Roseanne and Grace Under Fire. It was, your kid's screwing up in school. What are you going to do about it while you're working 2 jobs to keep your family alive? So the stories were more grounded, and that was a result of Roseanne's demand to put on a show that was unlike anything that had come before, and it was. I mean, she broke some ground.
We're going to stop you there.